So welcome on behalf of Mindprint Learning, who is the sponsor of today's webinar, Self-Awareness, the essential first step to improved engagement and learning. In case you're not familiar with Mindprint, Mindprint is the only K-12 solution that uses objective cognitive data to pinpoint how a student learns best and provides a strengths-based perspective and personalized learning plan to develop student efficacy. I've got a few housekeeping items that I want to go over before we get started. But before I do that, I just want to welcome our guest speakers. We're joined today by Nancy Weinstein, CEO and founder of Mindprint Learning, Pilar del Castillo Gomez, and Manjri Gupta. A little bit about our guest speakers. Pilar is a Spanish teacher at Anchorage Public Schools in Kentucky. She's been an educator for 20 years. She earned a master's degree in education from Cumberland University. She loves teaching Spanish, and aside from her great work in the classroom, traveling and gardening are her pastimes. Her passion for teaching has empowered her to create the first Spanish club at her school and summer school camp for elementary school students. She's an active member of the Kentucky World Language Association and has a passion towards the development of world language education in the state of Kentucky. Our second guest speaker is Manjri Gupta. She is the owner and founder of Axios Tutoring. Axios Tutoring is a Pittsburgh-based educational center offering a range of services, including executive functioning coaching, college advising, tutoring, and test prep. Manjri began her career in large corporations, but her belief in the value of education is what inspired her to start Axios. Axios' mission is to help students navigate school and transition to college with the skills and the confidence that they need, both in career and the lifestyles that they envision. So on behalf of Mindprint Learning, we thank you for joining us today, and I'm going to go ahead and share our slides and go over any housekeeping items and questions that might happen. So let me go ahead and share my screen. All right. Put in. Here we go. All right, just give me a second here. Here we are. All right, thumbs up, everybody. Can see my screen? Yeah, okay, great. So today's webinar will be recorded. I think we might have had a question in the chat about that. Some of you needing to scoot out a little bit early. If you registered for today's webinar, you will receive the recording link within about 24 hours. So be rest assured of that. And as well as any resources or links that you may need. All questions will be answered in the Q&A. So if you have any questions today, go ahead and put those in the Q&A. If it's something that we can answer right away, we have Vicki Algieri with us today, who is our Senior Director of Learning, and she'll be answering any of those questions. And any questions that are asked that would really benefit the rest of the audience here today, we're going to save those till the end for our question and answer period. The presentation is going to be about an hour long, and that includes Q&A. So that's it for housekeeping. So I guess I'll turn it over to you, Nancy, if you want to go ahead and cover today's agenda. Thank you.
Oh, great. Okay, so I'm Nancy Weinstein. I'm the founder of Mindprint. I'm going to start with some background on what self-awareness in learning looks like and feels like in the classroom at a very general level. But then fortunately, our guest speakers will get down to the practical, sharing their own experiences. Pilar will talk about what it feels like to develop self-awareness in a whole class environment. And then Manjri will talk more about working one-on-one with individual students and preparing them for college and life by developing their self-awareness and how important that is. And then, of course, we will leave time for Q&A after the session is over, and then we're always available to answer your questions here at Mindprint. Great. So what is self-awareness? We're going to start with a definition of self-awareness because if we can't define it, we can't address it. So next slide. So there are lots of definitions of self-awareness. I chose to use the Harvard Business Review definition because I think it really gets to the overall self-awareness is a lifelong skill that we develop. We're all constantly developing. So their definition is that it's an understanding of your personal values, aspirations, your fit in your environment, your thoughts, your behaviors, the why of your own personal behaviors, your strengths and their weaknesses, and not only where it affects you, but how it can affect others and the impact on others. And so they actually break it down into two categories of self-awareness. So internal, right? So how clearly we see ourselves in these environments, but then do we really understand how others see us? Right. So we can think we're great, but do others think we're great too? Or do we think we're great and others don't think we're great? And how that impacts our behaviors and our success in school and out of school. So that's our definition. Oops, can you go back, Melissa? Go forward one slide. There we go. Perfect. And so why is self-awareness important? Why are we doing this on a webinar targeted at students in K-12? If you look at the research, self-awareness and then self-regulation, which comes from self-awareness, has the greatest impact on learning outcomes, well above and beyond any other factor. Science of learning experts like to use a fancy word called metacognition, which is thinking about your thinking, which in very more common terminology would be your self-awareness in learning. And again, we will share these slides. So if anybody wants to see this chart after the fact to see the sort of differences and the impact that these different interventions have on learning. But the idea is if we can teach students self-awareness and then learn how to self-regulate and know how to ask for what they need, you're going to have the biggest impact on lifelong learning. Next slide, please. So for those of you who use the CASEL framework in your school building, you'll know that self-awareness is the first, you can skip Melissa, you got it, great. Self-awareness is the first skill in CASEL's competencies because it is a precursor to all the other skills, right? So it is really hard to make good decisions if you don't have self-awareness of what you're doing and how your behavior and understanding impacts others. It is really, really hard to self-regulate, which is covered by the arrow, if you don't have self-awareness because you don't know what you're regulating. So want you to know that this really does fit into probably everything that you might be doing in an SEL world. So next slide, please. All right, so here's a question, right? So we started with Harvard's definition of what self-awareness is, right? And then we said, it's so important. Well, what % of people actually are self-aware? Like, is this something that we really do need to address? So we start at the top, right? So what % of leaders, people who have been really successful in their careers, when Harvard did their research, did they say they sort of qualify as what we would call self-aware? They meet the criteria of both internal and external self-awareness. So Melissa, do you want to put up that poll and see what folks have to say?
Yeah, so I think everybody probably should be able to see the poll. For those of you that can't, here's the results that we got back. So what % of leaders are self-aware? What do we think as audience members? 16% of you said 0 to 25% are self-aware. 40% of you said it's somewhere between 26 and 50. 41% said 51 to 75. And 3% said 76 to 100. So
we got a nice
what are your thoughts
curve
on that? Yeah.
Right, we have a really nice little curve. Okay, so it sounds like most of you will be surprised to learn that the number that Harvard published is 15%, right? So, and that's having both internal and external self-awareness. So at some level, self-awareness is somewhat elusive of a skill, right? Which means that if we think about, that's where the strong adults are, where our students are. And that students not being self-aware, adults not being self-aware is actually well proven in the educational research. If anyone's familiar with the Dunning-Kruger effect in research, there's a lot of research about a lack of self-awareness among students, and that is what really does hamper their growth, because if you don't know what you're doing wrong, how do you get better? And so that just says there's lots of opportunity for us as the adults in the room to develop student self-awareness and therefore help them be more successful in school. So how do we do that, and why is Mindprint so focused on this? So this is the Mindprint learning pyramid. Anyone at this point who's familiar with our webinars or familiar with Mindprint has probably seen this learning pyramid, so we're not going to take today's session to go through it. We'll put a link in the chat so those of you who are not familiar with the learning pyramid can learn about it from one of our previous webinars. But suffice to say, when we talk about learner self-awareness, it starts with understanding how you learn and which of your skills are impacting your learning, both where are your strengths that can drive your learning success, and really understanding and appreciating your strengths. And we know that some of the strongest students don't appreciate their strengths. They don't realize that they're strong. And similarly, a lot of students who are struggle in one or more of these skills. They don't understand what they're struggling with, and therefore they don't know how to fix it. And so what we're going to talk about is how do we help students understand their strengths, lean into them in these areas, and then if they are struggling in one of these skills, how they use strategies to overcome what their challenge is. So next slide. So we're going to give you, this is an example of a student where we want to know, does the student have self-awareness? Is this student who needs to develop it, right? So you might say, this is self-aware. Student says, I'm not good in math. I know I'm working hard and I'm still getting B's and everyone else is getting A's and I want to get A's, right? So is that self-awareness? We would say that's the what, that's the challenge, but that's not really self-awareness. Self-awareness is understanding why you're having a challenge. So Melissa, if you want to go ahead. Okay, nope, go back. So a self-aware student would say, it's not that I'm bad in math, it's that I understand that pictures don't work for me, and there are a lot of pictures in my math class. My teacher uses a lot of pictures. And to me, that's just a blur. But when my tutor explains the pictures to me, I get it. I need words, right? Now we have not only we know what a challenge is perhaps not being so great in math or math not coming easily, but we have a why. And when we have a why, we know what to do about it. So next slide, please. Right. So self-awareness doesn't just have the what, right? It's also having the why. That's where we get to true self-awareness, right? And then if we have the why, then we get to the next skill that really changes things for students, which is the self-efficacy. What do I do to fix it, right? How do I use a strategy? So let's do one more example in the hypothetical, and then we'll let our resident experts help us with specific examples of how they've used it. So Melissa, next slide. So here on the why, in this example, going back to our pyramid, this was a student where they realized with self-awareness, wow, my visual abstract reasoning isn't as strong as my verbal. That's my why. That's the challenge I'm having. And then that allows teachers to go to the what, right? How do I get better? And so that's just finding the strategies that go with having stronger verbal reasoning in math and using the strategies that are going to work. And so all of our strategies at Mindprint are always free. You can find them, Melissa, if you advance the URLs up there, you can always go to our strategies for free. So once you understand your why, or you help your student understand their why, they can find the strategy that gets them to the how I get better and how I self-regulate. So next example will be around an SEL example. So if you go back one, Melissa, my animations might not be working. So we hear all the time that a parent comes in and says a student has terrible test anxiety, or teachers like, oh, that student is really capable, they just have test anxiety, right? Again, that is not the why, that's the what. That's not self-awareness, there's a problem. The self-awareness gets to the why, which is, in this example, we can advance. A student knows that they work slowly. When they try to work faster, then they make mistakes and they start to panic. And when you panic, you can't focus, right? Now we're actually getting to the real root of the problem is working slowly, and that causes a cycle for that student. Now we're into self-awareness. Once we get that, next slide, Melissa, please. Right, then we get to the pyramid again. All right, in this case, the student's challenge is processing speed. That's their why. And again, we can go to the strategies around test taking. How do I get better? How do I pace myself on tests so I don't feel like I'm running out of time and I can get better? And so that's the goal, is getting students to that level of self-awareness so they can also get to self-efficacy. And that is, I think that's the end of my section. And then we get to go into some great examples from our experts in the field. So thank you.
My mouse isn't moving as fast as my brain is. So let's welcome Pilar del Castillo Gomez, who's a classroom teacher and is going to give us a whole class case study perspective. Pilar?
Thank you. Yes, I'm Pilar Gomez, and I am a K-6 Spanish teacher. And this year is my first year with 7th and 8th graders as a study skills teacher. It is a high-performing middle school. I teach the classes in 3 consecutive weeks at the beginning of the school year, and then 3 consecutive weeks towards the end of the school year. 6 rotations, so I get 6 different classes, and then I'll see them again in between January and May, the 2nd rotation. This is our first year, as I said. We use the strategies. It helps them stay focused in class and relieve the stress and anxiety that comes with a lot of schoolwork. They have sometimes a lot to handle at this age. And I feel that the strategies have helped them a lot with just managing that work. If we can go to the next slide really quick. Yes, every student participates in the Boost course, which includes Mindprint. My lessons are about 30 to 45 minutes. I do have them for an hour, and I think they could be done maybe in less time, but I do take advantage of the hour to build on the conversation, because I feel like sometimes when they share the strategies between students, something that's working for one student might work for the other students, they listen a lot to each other. So I feel I take advantage of that time to have them share with each other. But we start the day with discussing the strategies that they used the night before. So if we go through the lesson of homework the day before, we discuss what did they do for homework that night, and or if it's memorizing, did they have to memorize something. So we go over the strategies that they used the night before. Then we do the warm-up activity, which I love the Mindprint warm-up activity. Kids really enjoy them. They're short, but to the point, and you know, everything has to do with that lesson that we have that particular day. I think they truly enjoy that because they get to get up sometimes and do things around the room. They don't have to sit down for the entire time. We introduce the lesson and then discuss the Mindprint strategies that are being used for that particular lesson. Students choose a strategy based on that lesson. So after we do the warm-up, we introduce a lesson and they choose one of the strategies that's on the 2nd page. And I'll show you, we have a picture of the 2nd page of their exam, or their, not exam, their Mindprint. So they choose one of the strategies. Typically, they have 3 strategies to choose from. They choose the one that calls the most. I mean, sometimes it's a strategy that they have used once before, but they stop using it. So they try it again, which is great because I feel that it's just given a chance to something else that they can do during those 3 weeks. It's, you know, it's 3 weeks, but they also use it between the time that I don't have them and when we meet again, we discuss the strategies if they have used it during that time as well. And then at the end, I do meet with them individually because luckily I have that time to meet with them individually to just make sure that they have chosen the strategy. That we use the Boost journal, which is where they log their their strategy for that day. We talk about if they have used it before, if it's something new, and how they plan to use it eventually. And then after that, they have time to go back and read strategies that they have used within Mindprint. This is the second page. The page that you have before is the second page, is where they choose their strategies. So it's very easy for them. I am grateful that the program has everything that I needed to present, because it makes it easier when you have other, like for me, I have Spanish K-6, where I have a new curriculum as well. So I am grateful that Mindprint is very, very simple to implement. And the kids are, liking the fact that they get to choose a strategy. This is not given to them as in you have to do this. No, they get to choose a strategy, and then they get to discuss it with their friends, and they see that if this person is being successful in math because they're using this strategy, then it should work for me if I'm the same kind of learner. So I think that conversation is very powerful, and just becoming self-aware of how they learn. I feel that that empowers them to choose strategies that will help them make the job easier. It's not about giving them more work. It's about making what they already have a lot easier than it used to be. And then again, I think the conversation is what I like the most. If you can go to the next slide. These are two of the strategies that they have enjoyed talking about and just sharing with the class, like staying focused, because they are in block schedule, and sometimes they become long. They're sitting down in a classroom for over an hour, almost 2 hours. It's something that it's difficult at that age. So talking about stretching in their seats, talking about just getting up and maybe getting some water if they're losing focus, or maybe participating more, raising their hand to participate helps them stay in focus. And I think that one has been one of the biggest conversations we've had in the classroom, where they share what's working for each other. And then the other one is the spaced out studying, because a lot of them think that they have to sit down to do their work or to study for hours before the test, when they can study just a few minutes at a time. And that one has been very successful. In the second rotation that I've had them, they have talked a lot about spacing out the studying and how it has been working, and they're not stressed out. They don't have that kind of anxiety that they used to build up before the exam, because they were not sure if they had studied enough or they had spent enough time studying. So I think those two are one of the ones that they have used the most. And I just enjoyed the conversation that has happened in the classroom, because they're aware of how they learn. So yes, these are my results. I'm already talking about them. The student conversations about learning have increased. They are talking about the challenges and how they're using the strategy. So like we said before, I think Nancy had said that not knowing, just saying I'm not good in math, and just taking that in and not knowing how to get past that, how to understand it. I feel like we're not telling them, you have to memorize this. No, we're giving them ways that they can use their study time, or how they can use their study time to be successful, so they don't feel like they're failing at that task all the time. Students who struggle heard from other students who were successful in school, which is, I think, the power in this tool, or the power in Mindprint, is that we have them all in the class, where students who are successful are sharing. They're saying, okay, you know what, I have been doing this already and has been working for me, and I'm the same learner as this other person who's probably not doing as good in math or as good in reading. Maybe he should try this. Or, is that sharing? The program allows for a type of conversation that is not typical at this age, because they don't talk about how to study. They talk about, oh, I did great on this test, so I have to study for an hour to pass this other test. We have to study this material. It's not how they're studying, is normally what they have to study, is what they talk about. Or so the strategies is, it's good to share. The self-awareness is increased. Again, before, students knew that they had to study, They didn't realize that the test could be easier by using a different strategy. So same thing, just they having to memorize something the night before or studying for hours, not knowing if they're fully prepared for this exam. It's a lot of anxiety, especially after the pandemic. I feel that a lot of the kids are going through this kinds of feelings that we didn't talk about before. So just giving them a way to study, I think it has helped. Now that they have that personalized go-to list of strategies to alleviate the stress and anxiety from the demanding schoolwork, they feel better. They feel better about their studying. They feel better about their schoolwork and not so stressed out. When they return to class, the strategies and conversations have continued. So when I see them after the 3 weeks, they have come to me and share that they're still using some of the strategies and what has worked for them, and that they have talked to other friends and they're studying together or they're quizzing each other, trying to space out that to get ready for the test way in advance rather than waiting until the last minute because they did not know how to start. So I feel that it has helped me a lot. As a teacher, it's very simple to implement, to put in place because everything's there for you. And then as a student, I feel that because they are self-aware, they know the kind of learner they are, they can now take in from other students, in the conversation that happens in the classroom, they take in from other students what could work for them, which is, I think it's a big deal at that age. It has been a great thing for us to add in our school. I think I don't know what else to
no, you're
share.
doing such great work, Pilar. I mean, it just sounds like the level of self-awareness that you've brought to these students and the gift that you've given them has really created student agency. They're owning their learning and they're aware of who they are as a learner, and they're doing it on their own, which is great. I mean, when you had shared that they went in a long period of time between when they see you and don't see you, and they were continuing to use those strategies, it's obviously a gift that that they appreciate and that they understand now, which is awesome.
Yeah.
So
I think, and yes, 7, then, knowing that this is only their first year, I feel that there's a lot of good coming out of the program, because it's not just more information for them to memorize, but how to get certain tasks done.
Yeah, no, and they're so young, like you're just giving them the gift of learning for the rest of their life, right? So that's great. Well, let's take it over to Manjri, who's going to talk about some individual student case studies. But thank you so much, Pilar, for giving us that group perspective and how this can be implemented in the classroom and how you create group self-awareness. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Hi. Can we go back to the previous one?
I don't know what's happening. It's like double clicking instead of single clicking.
That's okay.
Okay.
I mean, just because Pilar implemented it at a group level for us, we are more individualized. I just wanted to set the stage and have a context behind how we use Mindprint and in our service model. So we primarily work with high school students, and within that, our majority of our population is students who we are working with for test preparation, SATs and ACTs. And the nature of test preparation is such that we only have our students for a short term, and that term is anywhere from 8 to 12 weeks. So a lot has to happen within that short period of time. If anybody remembers their own test-taking times, you might recall how stressful, anxious, emotional, and intense time this is. For the most part, these tests are knowledge-based. We are a firm belief that if the student has learned academically, they have progressed as they should, then there should be a reasonable expectation for them to be able to do well on these tests. However, there are a couple of dimensions that add to these tests. And one of them is the problem-solving style of these tests, where, the test, the style of questions expect students to think across in a section of different disciplines. And then there is this emotional aspect of I am sitting down and taking this long 3-hour test, and the scores that I get is somehow a reflection of who I am. And it's going to decide what is going to happen to me in my future life. So needless to say, these tests are sort of like a culminating event for them, lifelong learning, growth, emotion that has led them to this point in time. So for us, as we get started with students, it really behooves us to get as much data as we can, quantitative and qualitative. So quantitative comes from all of these intake testing, and the qualitative is really where Mindprint comes in. So it forms the basis of our conversation with the student and the parent, and that really sets the stage for how we are going to engage, what kind of strengths and weaknesses we can expect a student to have, and create a timeline and a plan that is going to suit what we are seeing from that student. Melissa, let's go to the next slide now. So the case studies I have selected for us, the 2 case studies I've selected, they are, of course, from our test preparation students. The first one I have is NA. She came to us as a junior. She still is a junior. She came to us last summer. And as is the case for most of our, starting point, the parent calls us, want to get started with SAT prep. Let's come up with a plan. Let's come up with a timeline. That really is our marching order. And with that comes the intake suite of testing. They'll come in and take the full practice test and the Mindprint test. And besides these assessments, we are having a lot of conversation with the parent. Tell us, how the student is, what's their academic life, what's their extracurricular life. So we are gathering all of that information to have a well-rounded picture of who our student is. So in NA's case, let's go to the other, if you can click, I think it'll give us the academic data. Right. So as we are talking, the information we gathered on NA was that she struggled in school. Her grades were between A's, B, and C's, really all over the place. Starting PSAT score was 1,000, which is almost, I'm going to say below average. Cognitive data, next one. She's a competitive dancer. So I guess the dancer in her is very calm and poised outwardly, but inwardly she is stressed and anxious. And that's not something that you can tap into very easily. But she has enough of self-awareness that she tells us that she has focus issues. And so she has her own toolkit that she has developed over the years to help her stay focused or overcome that challenge. But she also feels that she has a tendency to forget things, and mom also admitted to the same thing. We then had the Mindprint results ready, and let's go on to the next slide, please. Thank you. So this is now what the Mindprint result actually looks like. We share with them that we all are like a spaghetti bowl. There are some strengths and weaknesses. The weaknesses are the challenges that we are always trying to overcome, and the strength is the wind behind our back, upon which we are really riding through the highs and the lows of life. So same for NA. When you look at her profile, there are some things that do stand out and sort of help us connect the dot. Executive functioning, as presented in this, attention and working memory are serious challenges for her. If only we had seen her, or she had done any testing, probably even a few months before she came to us, perhaps a 504 plan would have really served her well, so that she could get that extra time that she really truly needs. But at this time in her junior year, you know the drill. It is so hard to get in and get tested and get a 504 plan in place and do something with it. What I really liked about this was the strength side was strong verbal reasoning skills and flexible thinking. I love flexible thinking because it tells us student has the ability to adapt. has the ability to pivot. We can give them input and they will be able to step back and say, all right, what do I need to do differently to have a different outcome? So yes, I have things that hold me back, but the ability to be able to reflect upon and say, I can do it differently, that itself is a big pressure valve release. There's, okay, maybe I can work with things. So even though the conversation that mom wanted us to have was SAT prep, when we saw this, we felt that that's not going to be the right place for us to start from. With a full plate of activities and competitive dance, they never stop dancing 12 months in the year. And on top of that, you add schoolwork. And if I'm going to add SAT, I don't know where the student is going to go. If you have a bandwidth of 24 hours and you have all of these challenges, it's going to be a disaster. So what we actually recommended to her, if you go on to the next slide, please. Yeah, so let's take a step back. Even though junior year is all about, let's check off these things off our list, let's take a step back and actually work on the executive functioning program. We have a program called MAP, which is a short for Managing Agency and Anxiety Plan. It's a 10-hour program. It allows students, it gives them a tool set of things, strategies, and tips for things like organization, anxiety, memory, listening, being able to talk about what are the things that are holding them back. So the goal is for her to be able to work with, as she's learning these skills, adapt into her daily life and see what is working, come back, get feedback so that we can work on fine-tuning and helping her develop her own repertoire. In her case, it was very important. Pilar talked about chunking. It was very important for her to have short working periods, short intervals of working period, develop secondary focus, being able to, have her own agency. And not for teenage mind, everything is a priority. It's like a day is like a runaway train wreck. So for things, what is my priority? How do I organize my day? Some things are not very obvious. So we have spent a lot of time helping her develop that sense of understanding and identification. So for her, this was our approach as we saw what Mindprint had to tell us.
So Manjri, I'm sure people are wondering this right now because this is just such a great example of a whole child approach that you take and that Pilar is taking in the classroom. Do you work with students virtually? Or are you only in Pittsburgh? Can you just share that really quick before we move on to the next case study?
That's a good question. And you know what? And Pilar alluded to it during COVID. And this past year, we are seeing the COVID learning loss, right? And virtual learning, which was the model during those 2 years, has received a bad rep. And I can imagine that because you can't have a good, effective, efficient group instruction virtually. But one-on-one, I feel 8 out of 10 times, the students that we work with, they can sustain us virtually. Yes, there are kids who really do need hands-on instruction, but most of the time, one-on-one, so long as the camera is on, so long as some basic fundamentals are in place, virtual instruction can be just as effective as in person.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, thanks. Thank you for sharing that. I just knew the questions were going to come up. So let's go ahead and talk about the next student that you worked with.
Right. So the next case study I have selected is, again, she's a senior now. She came to us in her junior year. Same starting point. We want test preparation. Again, it started with let's understand who your child is. So in this case, the child presented to us as a really conscientious, hardworking, dedicated student. And in this case, you also had parents who were like almost her study partners. They were always supporting her. Very nice, supportive unit of parent and student there. But her challenge was low self-confidence and endless homework time. She would come home and she's just studying all the time. to her, she was drowning in how much time she was taking to do her stuff. Academically, she was doing well in school. Melissa, if you want to go on to, yeah. So in school, she was doing well, all A's, but they had to balance. They had to balance between regular and honors classes so she can keep up with all that she has to get through the day. Her baseline SAT score also was 1,000, same as my first case. Socially and cognitively, yes, low self-confidence just simply because it felt like for her, she is climbing a mountain every day because of how much time it takes for her to do her work. So with that background, when we had her take the mind print, on to the next slide, please. Thank you. So this is what her mind print looked like. Now, in this case, a very different mind print, different from the previous student. If I had to decide my strategy just based on the intake score of 1,000, which the first student had and this one had, I would have come up with the same outcome. But in this, the two situations were very different. In this case, now I have a student who is a really capable student. If I have to look at her profile, I'm looking at somebody who has exceptionally strong complex reasoning skills. I love flexible thinking. She has strong flexible thinking. So the only challenge that she had was weaker processing speed. And that is where she is burning. She just has the need to slow down a bit to be able to gather the nuances of what is it that she has to learn conceptually so that her complex reasoning skills can fully fathom all that she has to learn. So the time management part was coming in because of processing speed. So at the end of the day, there was nothing in this profile that told me that I need to step back and do something different. So it was full steam ahead for test preparation, but going in, we knew that we needed to be aware of timing challenges for her. So a lot of her instruction included making sure we are giving her some skimming strategies. We are giving her some prioritization techniques and tips as she is going through the test. But with iterations and with time, we really had a good outcome where her 1,000 score of the starting score finally probably ended up being high 1300s or close to 1400. So two different outcomes, starting score the same, but the mind print profile really gave us two different, very different directions of how we need to approach the student. And going back to what Pilar was talking about, sometimes this having the mind print result in front of the student gives them a very scientific basis to say, yes, I have an experience of what happens to me, but not everything is doom and gloom. Look at all the strengths I have. If I can just work on the weaknesses that I have, then, and that's my lifelong challenge. And that's the way I'm going to compensate for what holds me back and what moves me forward.
Yeah, I mean, you're giving the students the gift of, they feel heard and they feel understood, right? And they've got a name to call it of why they're struggling or why they feel really strong in other areas.
Yeah, it's almost removing the self from self to say, I am experienced, I have low confidence, or I have timing issues, or I can't focus. Yes, you can focus. We can work on that. It's not about fixing it. It's about adapting to the hand that you've been dealt with.
Yeah, exactly. Such great insights, Manjri and Pilar. Nancy, I don't know if you want to chime in. I do want to share with the audience. We've got I want to leave time for Q&A, but I also want to throw up that we've got our emails here. Please reach out to us. If you're interested in getting student support, you can email Manjri directly. We've got Vicky's. I already saw a question in the chat, like, how do I learn more about this Boost course? How do I learn more about MindPrint? Please reach out to Vicky as well. And I'm sure, Pilar, if you want to text on the side, if one of you want to email me, you got the invite to this webinar today from me personally. If you want to connect with Pilar, I'm sure she'd be wanting to talk teacher to teacher or district leader to teacher and learn more as well. I'm sure she'd be willing to share that information. So thank you all for joining us today. what sort of questions do we have? Do we have any other questions, Vicky?
We don't have any in the Q&A, but please feel free to go ahead and type away because we do have a little time that we could
Yeah.
absolutely answer. And in the meantime, I wanted to, first of all, say thank you so much to Pilar and Mandri. This was really inspiring to hear your stories. I wanted to also just call out that I love to hear about the collaboration that was happening in your class, Pilar, because on top of the students really looking in and learning about themselves, it also sounded like you have a really great environment for them to learn alongside each other and with each other. Thought that was a really important piece.
Yeah.
And I would just build on that and say, when you go back, because I know a lot of schools are using the CASEL framework, that idea is that you start with self-awareness and your own self-efficacy, but that's where the collaboration comes in, because once you have that self-confidence to talk about your strengths and your needs, and then you can start talking and supporting others, and that's the learning circle. So we love hearing it and hearing about your success with your students. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
And Nancy, we have a question just maybe to clarify on that Harvard study, suggesting, I think there might have been just some clarification. So the Harvard study suggests that self-awareness, that 15% of their leaders internally were self-aware, right? But the fact that self-awareness is necessary for success, correct? So
Yeah,
I think it got a little bit turned
Sorry.
around, and we have a question on that. So
Yeah, so absolutely. So I think that they talk about the study, and we can share that study with you, but the importance of self-awareness for long-term efficacy. But when you look at a broad array of leaders, so I think all of us could probably attest to being in situations where we thought we didn't have a great leader. So people can rise up, but the most successful leaders have that self-awareness and have both types of self-awareness. But when you actually survey the broad cross-section of leaders, some who might be deemed successful and some deemed less successful, only 15% meet the criteria of having both levels of self-awareness. Those 15% are the most successful leaders. And so the closer we can all get to that level, I think we're going to or get our students to that level. And then the other research that is more K-12 based would be the Dunning-Kruger effect, and the Dunning-Kruger research, which is very clear on the general lack of self-awareness among adolescents and the negative impact that it has on learning. So I think the research is abundantly clear, but I apologize if I didn't communicate it. I think I have enough self-awareness to know that maybe I don't communicate the best, but I'll try and fix that. I'll use my strategies, and I do communicate better when I write it down. So usually I have to write it 2 or 3 times, but I appreciate everybody's patience.
we also have a question about how this works for students in low SES environments, students who are academically at risk, and also ELL.
Do you want to take that figure? Or you want me to take it?
So I mean, this works because our student profile is a strength-based profile, and the students are learning about themselves and their skills relative to their own skills. So if a student is at risk or if they're struggling in school, we're all a combination of our stronger skills and our not as strong skills. So for themselves, they're still learning about their stronger skills. So there is still this empowerment and ability to learn about where you're stronger and use strategies that are recommended that are going to leverage those stronger skills. So that it's accessible in that way to struggling students or even high performing students. We have some preliminary data out from a school but Nancy, you might know more about this in terms of where they fall in SES.
Right. So what we tend to see amongst our lower SES populations, we do work with schools across the SES spectrum, if you will. So we work with some of the most elite private schools in the country, and top performing public schools, and Mondri students might sort of flow into those types of schools. We also work with some of the lowest SES schools in the country, where they'll have fewer than 10% of students that are proficient. What we find in those schools is that when you actually go back to our learning pyramid and look at those skills, that when you look at the bottom of the pyramid, which are those core foundational skills of complex reasoning, that there's virtually no difference in high SES and low SES populations in the visual reasoning skills. And so in the verbal reasoning, you might see differentials because of what we know about early exposure to language, but in those visual reasoning skills, there's almost no difference. So when you think about leaning into your strengths and how to use them, it provides a very, very clear framework for introducing complex topics and how to support those students. You might see no difference in memory either. So it gives a very clear pathway of how to teach, how to develop foundational skills and create that positive cycle of learning. Whereas if you just looked at achievement scores, you could honestly become, you could be a little demoralized. Like I said, we work with schools that have fewer than 10% of students that are proficient. What this enables us to do is say, no, these students are really capable despite these test scores, but this is how we as a school need to do things different. And we also have to help these students be aware that just because they might have difficulty reading, because maybe they haven't been exposed to early language, that doesn't mean they are not incredibly capable of learning and doing amazing things. Like their skills are highly correlated to STEM success. And it actually gets really exciting. The other piece is that the way we measure these skills, we distinctly measure the visual reasoning skills from the verbal reasoning skills, from the memory skills. And so for our ELL students, we can parse out what's a cognitive issue versus what is a language exposure issue. So it's So I think we're happy to talk about it, but you can tell it's an area of passion for me to make sure that we are helping those students and showing a path forward to break away from 10% or lower reading proficiency to much, much higher numbers.
We have a question, a couple questions about the Boost course itself and some details. So one about how to help students in the course that start to lose focus. So I'm just going to share that the course is flexible. So you can chunk the lessons into shorter periods. A lot of it is, as Pilar said, it opens up with an active warm-up activity. So the students are getting up and doing things that are active. And then also it's collaborative, as you heard from Pilar, but also students are learning about themselves. So often it's very motivating to be talking about yourself. So we find that to be sort of a way that students tend to check out less than if they're not focused on themselves. Pilar, I don't know if you want to add anything to that, or if you had any experiences with students and attention.
I just, I mean, I enjoy the fact that they, like we said earlier, they listen to their peers a lot. So just not, so being able to listen to others at the same time we're learning about the strategies is something that I've seen a lot of improvement in, instead of me saying, what they needed to do. I feel like they're telling each other. So staying focused is something that that they do because they want to listen to each other. They're having this big group conversation. I'm not so sure if I'm answering your question. I was reading one of the comments about ELLs. I was an ELL student myself as a teenager, and I feel that knowing or being aware of the way I learned would have been a lot easier, would have made things easier for me to kind of know the way, to have those strategies and say, hey, this material, I can learn it this way. So I'm going to be proactive and look for ways that I can learn this material. Now with the internet, it just makes it so much easier for students to find information in a way that it's easy for them to learn. So I think with the ELLs is the only one that I felt like connected, with the question, because I feel that being aware of the way that I learned back then would have been something that would have helped me make things easier. So I think it does apply to ELAs, like Nancy said, it gives you the difference between the language problem versus the ability to learn this material that the science teacher's given them or the math teacher's given them. So a lot of the teachers just give up because they feel like the kids don't understand, and just taking that and being proactive or teaching the kids to be proactive and do things their own way helps. Sorry, I think I took more time here.
No, thank you for sharing that. I mean, you can even see in the chat, people thank you for sharing your personal story. To reiterate what someone else said, but thank you.
Nancy, we have one final question, and before everybody hops up, I just want to reiterate what Vicky said. Pilar and Manjari, thank you so much for joining us today and providing your perspective. You probably haven't had time to look in the chat while you're speaking, doing the same thing, doing it at the same time, but just so many compliments about the work that you're doing, and thanking you for sharing these case studies and saying how powerful it was to hear those today. So getting a lot of inquiries on how this can be implemented in different school locations as well. So we really appreciate all of you in the audience joining us today. We have one final question, and so if you want to stay on, please do. You will be receiving an email follow-up with the recording, any sort of resources or research that was shared today. So know that will be coming to you by the end of the week. And so thanks again for joining us today. The final question, Nancy, I think maybe you could share this, and again, this might be shared in a follow-up email, but is do we have any published studies clarifying what we're seeing in different populations, private schools versus public, students with low proficiency, and sort of the gains that we're seeing with that? I think we do. So if you could speak to that.
We do. If we want to put a link in the chat to the research section of our website.
Yep.
On the lower income populations, we have a case study written up by Anacostia Public School in Washington, D.C., where under 10% of their students were proficient, and the approach we took with them, which I think was really motivating to teachers as much as motivating to students, and I think that was very important. But we are happy to share specific examples, and also have you talk to leaders in other, in a variety of districts and in situations where how they've used it, because I think what we've come to appreciate is that every school and every situation, and as Manjari can tell you, every student is different. So the data is there for you, it's accurate, and the tools are there, but how you customize it to your specific needs, we're there to support you, but that's what teaching and learning is all about, is that relationship and customization.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, everybody. And we will see you next in our next series is going to be focused on MTSS, and that will be in May. So if you can just remember May, MTSS, and we hope you all can join us and that you share this recording with your colleagues. Again, if you have any additional questions, please follow up with Vicky or Pilar or Manjari as well. Thank you and have a great day.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.